On a distant planet that circled a dying red star, the landscape stretched like jagged teeth across the horizon. Sharp cliffs rose abruptly from barren plains, casting long shadows over valleys filled with dark, churning rivers of unknown liquid. The air shimmered with heat and the faint smell of minerals. This was not a place meant for comfort nor for life as most species knew it, but it was home to the Xylar, a proud and ancient civilization whose cities were carved from the stone itself, rising high into the sky with towers that looked like frozen screams. Their society had survived for centuries through discipline, war, and intelligence, each generation training harder than the last. Xylar, the commander of the planet's forces, stood atop a cliff overlooking his fortress. His tall, sinewy body was adorned in armor of blackened metal, etched with symbols that marked centuries of conquest. His eyes, sharp and glimmering with an unnatural green light, scanned the horizon. The sensors had detected an approaching ship hours ago, but this one was different. It moved slowly, deliberately, and without the typical energy signatures that meant weapons were armed. Xylar's instincts told him that the beings inside were clever. They always were. But something about this ship unsettled him. He had fought humans before. Stories of them had reached him from scattered encounters in other systems. They were unpredictable, loud, and chaotic. They relied not just on technology, but on creativity and stubbornness, traits the Xylar found confusing. They were weak in some ways, strong in others, but always irritatingly persistent. Xylar had trained his soldiers to crush humans with superior tactics, superior firepower, and superior discipline. And yet here, on his homeworld, a single human ship approached without warning, and he felt an unfamiliar tightening in his chest, a sensation he did not recognize, not even from his most difficult campaigns. The ship landed smoothly on a flat plateau near the fortress, steam and dust rising around it. The hatch opened, and a figure stepped out. Xylar tensed, muscles coiling like springs. The human moved slowly but confidently, eyes fixed straight ahead. There was no fear, no hesitation, no visible weapon, just a calm certainty that unnerved Xylar more than any blaster ever could. The aliens' warriors, stationed along the walls, bristled with tension. Their sharp claws flexed over their energy rifles, ready to fire at a moment's notice. But Xylar held up a hand. He wanted to see this human first, to measure them, to understand if they were a threat or something else entirely. As the human drew closer, Xylar's mind raced. Humans were unpredictable, yes, but this one moved with purpose that suggested more than mere survival. Their stride was steady, unhurried, and yet filled with resolve. There was something in the way they held themselves, something that reminded Xylar of legends his people told about heroes of old, beings who could face impossible odds and still prevail. But legends were stories. This human was real. "Commander," a voice whispered behind him. It was his lieutenant, a younger Xylar named Thal, whose sleek blue eyes mirrored the green of his commanders in intensity. "They are coming alone. No backup. Should we engage?" Xylar did not answer immediately. His eyes never left the human. He studied every movement, the rhythm of their steps, the slight tension in their shoulders, the way they scanned the terrain. Nothing about this human screamed weakness. If anything, it screamed confidence, an almost dangerous kind of confidence. "Not yet," Xylar said finally. His voice was low, resonant, carrying the authority of decades of command. "Let them come closer. I want to see what they intend. Sometimes the mind of a human is stronger than any weapon." The human approached the outer gates of the fortress, where the walls were carved with intricate patterns depicting centuries of Xylar victories. Their presence made the carvings seem smaller, almost insignificant. The alien soldiers' whispers filled the air, a mixture of fear and awe. None of them had ever seen a human walk so boldly into a place where countless armies had fallen and countless enemies had died trying to breach the walls. Xylar descended from the cliff with slow, deliberate steps. Every footfall on the jagged rock sent small stones tumbling down into the ravines below. His armor clinked with each movement, a reminder to all who watched that he was not just a commander, but a warrior unmatched in skill. As he approached the human, the wind shifted, carrying the faint metallic scent of the fortress and the strange smell of the human. The human paused a few meters from him. Their eyes were deep and unwavering, reflecting the red light of the dying star above. "I am here," the human said, their voice clear and strong. "To end this conflict before it destroys your people and mine." Xylar's first reaction was disbelief. No human had ever spoken to him like that. They had never approached without a weapon, without arrogance, but also without fear. Every word was deliberate, every tone carefully measured. This was not a simple being looking to negotiate for their life. This was a being who believed in their purpose so completely that nothing else mattered. "You come alone," Xylar said, his voice carrying across the plateau. "You risk death by stepping onto my world." "Why?" "I risk nothing that I cannot endure," the human replied. "I have come to prevent a war that will destroy us all. Your people will not survive the conflict, nor will mine. Yet there is a way to stop it. I can help you see it." The alien commander studied the human's face. There was no trickery, no deceit. Humans were notorious liars, masters of manipulation, yet this one's eyes did not waver. Their hands were empty, their posture relaxed but unshakable. Xylar felt something stir within him, something he had not felt in centuries: doubt. "Your confidence is misplaced," Xylar said, trying to mask the unease in his tone. "Do you understand the power you face here? My warriors are trained to annihilate intruders. My technology can destroy your ship before you can even draw a breath. Why do you not fear?" "I fear what will happen if I do nothing," the human said. "I have seen worlds burn, civilizations collapse, and countless lives wasted because pride and anger ruled over reason. I do not fear you. I fear the cost of failure more than I fear you." The alien soldiers exchanged uneasy glances. They had never seen their commander so quiet, so thoughtful. Xylar, too, felt the weight of the human's words. They were simple, almost naive in their phrasing, yet they carried a truth that he could not ignore. He had spent centuries calculating strategies, preparing for every possible threat. Yet here was a single being who walked into his domain with nothing but determination and moral clarity. "Very well," Xylar said finally. "If you wish to convince me, you must prove your resolve. You will undergo a trial, designed to test not just strength, but wisdom, strategy, and endurance. Survive, and perhaps your message will be heard. Fail, and you will die here." The human nodded, unflinching. "I accept." Xylar signaled to his warriors to prepare the trial. A massive gate opened in the side of the cliff, revealing a corridor that led deep into the heart of the fortress. Beyond it lay the first challenge: a valley of jagged rock and boiling liquid, filled with traps that had ended the lives of many before. The human did not hesitate. Step by step they moved forward, fully aware of the dangers that awaited. Xylar watched them go, a strange mix of fascination and unease growing within him. He had faced countless enemies in his life, yet none had commanded his attention in this way. He felt a new sensation rising in his chest, one he did not recognize. Could it be respect? Perhaps. Or maybe it was fear of what the human represented, not just as a being, but as an idea. For centuries, Xylar's people had survived by dominating, by crushing those who opposed them. And yet, here was a single human challenging that notion, with nothing but presence, intelligence, and courage. Xylar realized that this encounter could change everything. As the human disappeared into the corridor, the wind carrying faint sounds of their movement, Xylar stood silent, watching, thinking. For the first time, he wondered if his civilization's survival depended not on power alone, but on understanding, on the ability to recognize strength in forms he had never imagined. The sun dipped lower in the sky, casting the jagged landscape in deep reds and oranges. Shadows lengthened across the valleys and cliffs, merging with the darkness of the unknown. Xylar's mind raced with possibilities, strategies, and outcomes, but one thought remained clear. The human had already altered the course of his world. He turned back toward his fortress, each step deliberate, heavy with the weight of centuries of command. The trial had begun, but already, in ways he did not yet fully understand, the outcome felt inevitable. A single human had entered his domain, unarmed and unafraid, and the echo of that presence would resonate far beyond this valley, far beyond this moment. For the first time in his long life, Xylar did not feel the certainty of victory. Instead, he felt something else, a stirring of respect, a spark of unease, and an undeniable sense that the world, as he knew it, had changed forever. The human stepped into the corridor, leaving the red sunlight and jagged cliffs behind. The walls were carved from dark stone, rising high above, etched with images of victories, conquests, and the legends of the Xylar people. Every step echoed through the chamber, and the sound seemed unnaturally loud, bouncing off the walls like a drumbeat marking the beginning of a challenge. The human did not rush. They moved deliberately, aware that each moment mattered, aware that every step was being watched. Ahead lay the first part of the trial, the valley. Xylar had prepared it carefully. Jagged rocks jutted from the ground like spikes, and molten rivers ran through the chasms, spilling steam into the air. The terrain was treacherous, and hidden traps lay waiting. Ancient machines hummed beneath the surface, ready to crush, burn, or impale any intruder who underestimated their cunning. To survive this valley required more than strength. It required intelligence, patience, and courage. The human paused at the entrance, scanning the landscape. Their eyes moved quickly, calculating risks, observing patterns in the flow of molten liquid, the placement of stones, and the hidden shadows where danger might wait. Their breathing was steady, controlled. Each inhalation and exhalation a rhythm that grounded them amidst the chaos that threatened every step. Xylar watched from his observation deck high above the valley. His warriors lined the walls, tense and ready, waiting to see how the human would proceed. The alien commander had seen many intruders in his long life, but none had approached the challenge with such composure. Some had rushed in, relying on brute force and the assumption that only power mattered. Others had tried to outthink the valley, but had fallen victim to their own impatience. This human, however, seemed neither arrogant nor careless. The first obstacle appeared suddenly. A massive stone slab rose from the molten river, blocking the only visible path forward. Beneath it, the liquid churned with deadly heat, capable of incinerating anything that fell. The human examined the slab, noting the slight cracks along its edges. They adjusted their footing, leaped lightly onto a protruding rock, and used their hands to test the surface. With careful, deliberate effort, they shifted the slab slightly, enough to create a narrow path. The watchers gasped. No alien had ever dared touch the stones in this way. Most would have assumed it impossible, believing the machinery beneath the valley would punish any attempt to alter the terrain. Yet the human moved with precision, testing each step, measuring each shift of weight. Their mind was not only fast but flexible, able to see solutions where Xylar's most experienced engineers had seen only danger. Further into the valley, new threats appeared. Hidden blades swung from walls, molten spikes shot upward without warning, and streams of toxic gas hissed through fissures in the rock. The human paused only briefly at each hazard, observing its pattern and timing. They ducked, rolled, and leapt with precision that seemed almost unnatural. Each movement was calculated, fluid, and efficient, conserving energy while avoiding the dangers that would have destroyed any ordinary intruder. Xylar felt an unusual mixture of pride and anxiety. Pride, because the human demonstrated qualities he respected: intelligence, courage, and adaptability. Anxiety, because he recognized that his own tactics, his traps, and his most trusted warriors might not be enough to stop this being. The human was learning faster than he anticipated, adapting in ways that no Xylar had ever trained for. Hours passed as the human navigated the valley. The sun began to sink below the horizon, turning the sky into a mix of deep reds and purples. The molten rivers glowed like veins of fire, reflecting off the human's determined face. Xylar could see the faint sheen of sweat on their brow, the marks of exertion on their clothes, yet their pace never faltered. They were not merely surviving, they were mastering the valley. Suddenly, a mechanical gate descended from above, cutting off the path forward. From hidden panels, energy beams activated, crisscrossing the space in a deadly lattice. A single misstep could trigger an explosion or immobilize the human in seconds. Most beings would have panicked, retreating to reassess. The human, however, did not hesitate. They observed the pattern of the beams, noted the intervals of their activation, and calculated a path through that required both precision and timing. Step by step, they moved, barely making a sound. The heat from the molten rivers and the hum of energy beams created a tension that was almost unbearable, yet the humans' focus never wavered. They twisted, ducked, and jumped with an elegance that suggested experience beyond mere survival instincts. For the first time, Xylar's warriors began to whisper among themselves. Some admitted in hushed tones that the human might survive the valley entirely. Others feared the consequences if they did. The human reached the end of the valley, where a massive chasm separated them from the next chamber. A bridge, suspended by energy fields, shimmered faintly in the dim light. It looked fragile, impossible to trust, but the human did not hesitate. They stepped onto it, testing its stability, balancing carefully, and moving forward with the same unwavering determination that had carried them through the valley. Halfway across, the energy field flickered, threatening to collapse under their weight. The human adjusted, shifting their balance, and continued forward without slowing. Behind them, Xylar clenched his fists, aware that every step was a test, not only of physical skill, but of ingenuity and courage. The human reached the other side safely, their expression calm, almost serene, as if they had expected every challenge and overcome each without doubt. The next chamber was darker, colder, and filled with new dangers. Mechanical sentinels rose from hidden compartments, their claws glinting in the faint light. Xylar had designed these machines to react to fear, aggression, and hesitation. They were relentless, programmed to strike with precision, and many intruders had failed at this very point. The human did not hesitate. They moved slowly, analyzing the sentinels' movements, predicting their strikes before they occurred. With a mixture of quick reflexes and clever misdirection, the human dodged attacks, redirected their opponent's momentum, and disabled them without unnecessary violence. Xylar felt a strange sensation, watching the human. Their methods were unorthodox, but effective, blending intelligence with a sense of morality that the Xylar had long forgotten. By the time the human reached the final chamber of the trial, night had fallen over the planet. The stars shone faintly through the cracks in the fortress ceiling, and the air was filled with the hum of ancient machinery and the faint scent of molten rock. Here, the last challenge awaited. a puzzle of strategy, requiring not just strength or reflexes, but reasoning, foresight, and understanding of both allies and enemies. Xylar stepped closer to the observation deck, leaning over the railing to watch. His heart, though alien in form and function, beat faster than he expected. He had faced countless challenges in his life, and yet nothing had prepared him for this. The human moved with clarity, approaching the puzzle methodically, considering each option, evaluating the risks and rewards of every choice. Hours passed as they worked, the puzzle testing not only their mind, but their patience and endurance. Xylar watched silently, realizing that he had underestimated this species entirely. Humans, he thought, were not merely clever. They were resilient, adaptive, and unshakably determined. Where the Xylar relied on centuries of planning, humans relied on instinct combined with intelligence, able to improvise in ways that no machine or formula could predict. Finally, the puzzle clicked into place. The humans stood back, breathing steadily, their expression calm. They had completed the trial, not through brute force or aggression, but through observation, strategy, and unwavering resolve. Xylar's eyes narrowed, a mixture of admiration and unease settling over him. "Remarkable," he muttered, almost to himself. "They have survived what no one else could." The human turned, as if sensing the commander's presence. "I have completed the trial," they said simply. "Now you must listen." Xylar hesitated. He had expected aggression, bargaining, perhaps even fear. But this human spoke not from weakness, but from strength, a strength that commanded attention without threat. His mind, trained to measure opponents in terms of firepower and strategy, struggled to process this. Here was a being who had endured impossible odds, solved impossible problems, and stood before him with nothing but purpose. "Your people have lived by domination, by fear, for centuries," the human continued. "But there is another way. You can survive without destroying others. You can lead without crushing every being who opposes you. But only if you choose to see beyond pride, beyond old rules." Xylar felt a flicker of something strange in his chest. He had faced countless enemies, yet never one like this. The human did not threaten him. They did not demand obedience. They offered perspective, insight, and a challenge far greater than any battle, the challenge of understanding. The human left the chamber as silently as they had entered, moving back toward the fortress gates. Xylar followed them with his gaze, aware that the trial was over, but that the real test had only begun. For the first time, he questioned not just the human, but himself, and the ways his civilization had lived and survived. And deep within him, a thought began to form. Perhaps, just perhaps, the human had changed the course of his world forever. The day after the human completed the trial, the fortress felt different. The corridors that had once echoed only with disciplined footsteps and low mechanical hums now carried whispers, soft, uncertain, and filled with curiosity. Soldiers and engineers alike exchanged cautious glances, some daring to talk about the intruder who had survived challenges that had claimed the lives of the bravest warriors. Even the youngest recruits looked to the human as if seeing a hero from the legends etched into the fortress walls. Xylar, standing once more on the cliff overlooking the jagged landscape, felt the shift keenly. The valley below, which had been prepared to crush any intruder, now seemed smaller somehow. The traps, the dangers, the intricate systems of defense, all had failed to stop a single human. It was impossible to deny that this being possessed qualities unlike any Xylar had ever encountered: patience, intelligence, and a determination so absolute it seemed almost alien even to him. He called his council together in the grand chamber, the walls shimmering with faint lights from energy conduits running through the stone. His advisors, normally confident and unwavering, looked hesitant. Commander, Thal said quietly. The human. They have changed the way my people see this place. Some warriors say the trials were meant to prove strength, yet the human passed through with only their mind and determination. It unsettles them. Xylar nodded slowly. Yes, it unsettles me as well. I train my warriors for war, for conquest, and yet this single being has exposed gaps in our thinking, gaps I did not know existed. They survived without arrogance, without force. And my people are beginning to question their own methods because of it. He paused, thinking. The human had not spoken much after the trial, only stating that Xylar must listen. That single phrase lingered in his mind, like a persistent rhythm that refused to fade. Listen. The word carried weight, not as a command, but as a challenge. Could he, the commander of an ancient civilization, truly listen to an outsider and see beyond the centuries of tradition and pride? The human entered the fortress courtyard quietly, moving with the same calm determination as before. Soldiers parted instinctively, unsure whether to respect or fear this being. Xylar approached them for the first time without armor, standing in plain uniform to meet the intruder on equal footing. There was no ceremony, no threat, only the weight of centuries of command in his stance. You survived, Xylar said, voice low but steady. I expected most intruders to fail. Some might have died trying even to reach the end of the valley. And yet you succeeded. Why? The human looked at him calmly. Because I had to. Your civilization is strong, but you are trapped by pride and fear. You cannot see beyond the methods you have always known. You fight wars that destroy lives unnecessarily, and you teach your young that victory is only through domination. I wanted to prove there is another way. Xylar frowned. And what is this way? Understanding, the human said simply. Observation, patience, reason. Strength is important, yes, but it is not enough. You can lead without crushing those who oppose you. You can survive without resorting to destruction. But only if you are willing to see what I see. Xylar felt an unfamiliar tension rising in him. His people had survived because they mastered fear, because they imposed order on chaos, because they did not hesitate to strike first and strike hard. To consider another path was difficult. And yet, standing here before this human, he could not deny that they were right. He had seen it in his soldiers, in the whispered conversations, in the way some looked at the human with awe rather than obedience. Then show me, he said finally. Show me what you mean. I will watch and I will listen. But understand this. If your ideas fail, it will cost lives, my people's lives. Can you bear that? The human met his gaze without flinching. I can, and I will. But the cost of doing nothing is far greater than the risk of trying something new. Over the next days, the human began to move through the fortress and beyond, observing the soldiers, speaking with the engineers, and examining the training grounds. They asked questions, sometimes simple, sometimes difficult, forcing Xylar and his council to think beyond old strategies. Why were certain patrols assigned in predictable patterns? Why were soldiers trained to rely solely on weapons and strength, not observation and negotiation? Why were other species treated as enemies before dialogue could begin? At first, the council bristled at these questions. Many saw them as a challenge to authority, even a threat to tradition. But slowly, as the humans spoke and demonstrated their methods, the reasoning became impossible to dismiss. Patterns emerged that had gone unnoticed for centuries. Efficiency could be gained, lives could be preserved, and strength could still be maintained, all without needless aggression. Xylar began to feel the stirrings of something he had not experienced in decades. Hope. The human's perspective did not weaken his civilization. It gave them new tools, new ways to think about survival and leadership. He saw warriors adjusting their patrols, engineers reworking defenses to be smarter rather than more deadly, and young recruits watching with admiration rather than fear. One day, the human requested to meet the soldiers in the training grounds. Xylar agreed, curious to see how they would interact with his people directly. The courtyard was filled with hundreds of warriors, each standing in perfect formation, their weapons gleaming in the red light of the dying sun. The human stepped forward, and silence fell. Not fear, but silence filled the air, a sense of anticipation so thick it was almost physical. The human spoke simply. "I have come to show you another way. You are strong, yes, but your strength is wasted when it destroys what could be preserved. You can be leaders without using fear, protectors without using oppression, and warriors without causing unnecessary pain. You can survive, but only if you are willing to see beyond the habits of the past." The soldiers shifted uncomfortably. Some whispered to each other, trying to make sense of the words. Xylar watched closely, noting the reactions. There was confusion, yes, but also curiosity. Slowly, one by one, the warriors began to nod, their expressions changing from doubt to contemplation. They had always been taught to follow orders without question, to respect power above all else. But now, for the first time, someone was asking them to think, to consider, and to imagine a future that was not dictated solely by conquest. Thal approached Xylar quietly. "Commander," he said, "they are listening. Some even want to try the methods the human speaks of. It is remarkable. I did not think it possible." Xylar nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. "It is possible," he said, "but it will not be easy. Change never is, and not all will accept it willingly. Some will resist. Some will fear what they do not understand. But if the human is correct, we can survive in ways we never have before." As days passed, the human began leading small exercises with the soldiers, demonstrating strategies that relied on observation, negotiation, and adaptability rather than brute force. They showed how to outmaneuver enemies without unnecessary violence, how to anticipate threats before they arose, and how to inspire loyalty through respect rather than fear. Each demonstration was met with a mixture of skepticism and awe, but over time the lessons began to take root. Even Xylar's most hardened warriors began to change. Some admitted quietly to each other that they had underestimated the human. Others marveled at how quickly the human adapted to situations that would have confounded even the most experienced Xylar. The human's methods were not weaker. They were stronger, in ways the aliens had not considered. Strength combined with thought, courage combined with wisdom, and discipline combined with understanding, these were qualities that could reshape an entire civilization. Xylar himself could not deny the effect the human had on him. He found himself thinking differently about battles, strategies, and even leadership. The human had shown him that survival was not only about power, but about perspective, that the greatest victories were not always won on the battlefield, but in the minds and hearts of those who fought and those who watched. One evening, as the red sun dipped below the horizon and the jagged cliffs cast long shadows across the fortress, Xylar stood alone on the cliff's edge. The human walked beside him silently, as if respecting the moment of reflection. For the first time in centuries, Xylar did not feel the certainty of control. Instead, he felt something he could not name, hope, perhaps, or understanding, or a sense of possibility he had never allowed himself to imagine. "Your methods are different," Xylar said finally, his voice low. "I did not expect this. I thought survival meant domination, fear, and strict control. Yet you have shown me another way. A way that does not weaken us, but strengthens us in ways I cannot yet fully describe." The human nodded. "That is because the greatest strength is not always seen immediately. It grows slowly through choices, through understanding, and through courage. You and your people can survive, Xylar, but only if you are willing to embrace it." Xylar remained silent, thinking. For the first time, he considered the future of his civilization not in terms of victories and defeats, but in terms of possibilities. The human had not fought with weapons, yet they had won more than any battle could achieve. They had won respect, admiration, and the beginning of change. The wind shifted, carrying the faint scent of molten rock and the distant hum of machinery. The human stood quietly beside him, a calm presence in a world filled with jagged edges and uncertainty. Xylar realized then that the trial was not over. The valley, the chambers, the puzzles, all had been preparation for this moment. This was the true test, the test of understanding, of willingness to change, and of courage to imagine a future beyond the limits of the past. And Xylar, for the first time in centuries, felt that he might be ready. The morning air was cold, sharp, and full of possibility. The jagged cliffs of the planet glimmered faintly under the light of the dying red star, casting long, dark shadows across the fortress. The human walked through the main courtyard with steady steps, unarmed, as always. The soldiers who had once viewed them with awe now followed quietly, their expressions respectful rather than fearful. Even the youngest recruits, barely old enough to hold weapons properly, looked to the human with curiosity and hope. Xylar stood at the edge of the courtyard, watching. The sun caught the metallic edges of his armor, highlighting the lines of experience etched into his tall, powerful frame. He had watched the human over days and nights, observing not only their intelligence, but their patience, their morality, and their ability to inspire. His people had survived countless wars, had built empires through fear and strength, yet now he saw a possibility he had never imagined: survival through understanding. The human approached him slowly, their eyes reflecting the red light of the star and the faint glow of the molten rivers nearby. "It is time," the human said softly. "Your people are ready, Xylar. They are beginning to see what I have tried to show them. But the final step is yours to take." Xylar's eyes narrowed. "The final step?" "Yes," the human replied. "The moment when you must choose to embrace this change fully, or reject it. The choice is yours, but understand that the path you take will determine the future of your civilization." Xylar looked around the courtyard. His soldiers were assembled in formation, their weapons set aside, their expressions alert yet calm. They had watched the human teach, guide, and inspire. Some had begun to speak quietly among themselves about new strategies, new ways of thinking about threats and challenges. The seeds of change were planted, but they needed him, their commander, to allow them to grow. He thought of the centuries his people had spent mastering fear, domination, and control. He thought of the countless battles, the victories and defeats, the lessons of history etched into stone and blood. And he thought of the human, one being unarmed, who had achieved more than any army, more than any weapon. The human had survived impossible odds, solved puzzles, navigated deadly terrain, and inspired loyalty without demanding it. Xylar realized, in a way that both excited and unsettled him, that the human had already won. "Show me," Xylar said finally, his voice low but steady. "Show me what you mean, and I will consider it. But know this, my people will not follow me blindly. They will need to see the results for themselves." The human nodded. "Then watch closely, listen, understand, and you will see the path forward." Together they walked to the edge of the fortress, overlooking the valley that had been the first trial. The molten rivers flowed below, the jagged rocks standing like guardians of old. Xylar's warriors had trained here for decades, learning discipline, combat, and survival. But the human was about to show them something different. The human began to speak to the assembled soldiers, their voice calm, clear, and full of conviction. You have all been trained to fight, to conquer, to survive. But survival is not only about power, it is also about observation, understanding, and courage. True strength is knowing when to act, how to act, and why to act. You can protect your people without destroying others. You can lead without inspiring fear. You can survive, and even thrive, without relying solely on domination. The soldiers listened in silence. Some shifted uncomfortably, unsure of how to respond. Others looked thoughtful, considering the words carefully. Xylar observed them closely, noting the subtle changes in posture, the light in their eyes, the small nods of agreement. The human's message was sinking in, reaching parts of them that had never been touched by traditional training or doctrine. Then the human moved into the valley itself, demonstrating. They showed how to navigate the jagged terrain with intelligence rather than force, how to avoid traps by understanding patterns, how to approach danger with calm focus instead of reckless aggression. They guided soldiers through the exercises, correcting mistakes gently, encouraging observation, patience, and reasoning. Xylar's warriors began to follow, slowly at first, then with growing confidence, as they realized the methods were effective. Thal approached Xylar quietly. "Commander," he said, voice barely above a whisper, "look at them. They are learning faster than we expected. They are thinking for themselves, not just following orders. This is remarkable." Xylar nodded, though his mind was still heavy with contemplation. "Yes," he replied, "it is remarkable, but the final step is mine. If I embrace this, it changes everything. The way we have lived, the way we have fought, all of it could be different." He turned his gaze to the human, who stood calmly, watching the soldiers adapt, observing every movement, every expression. The human's presence was steady, unwavering, a living example of the principles they taught. Xylar felt something stir deep within him, a mixture of pride, respect, and something he had not felt in centuries: hope. "Commander," the human said softly, as if reading his thoughts, "the choice is yours. You can continue as before, relying on fear and strength alone. Or you can lead your people into a future where survival does not require the destruction of others. You can be the one to change the path of history." Xylar closed his eyes for a moment, thinking of the centuries behind him, the victories and losses, the lessons and mistakes. He thought of the soldiers who had trained under his command, the young recruits looking to him for guidance, the generations of his people who had survived through fear. And he thought of the human who had entered his world alone, unarmed, and achieved more than armies ever could. He opened his eyes. "I see it now," he said, voice firm and resolute. "I understand. Fear and domination are tools, yes, but not the only ones. Strength alone is not enough. True survival requires wisdom, observation, and courage. You have shown me that." The human nodded once, a faint smile on their face. "Then lead your people, Xylar. Show them the path forward. They will follow if you are willing to act with clarity, with understanding, and with courage." Xylar turned to his soldiers. "Today," he said, voice carrying across the courtyard, "we begin a new chapter. We have learned strength, discipline, and endurance for centuries. But now we must learn something greater: understanding, observation, courage without fear. We will survive, not just through domination, but through intelligence, wisdom, and unity. Follow me, and we will shape a future that no one could have imagined." The soldiers looked at one another, then back at their commander. Slowly, cautiously at first, they nodded. Then more nodded. Soon the courtyard was filled with a quiet energy, a sense of purpose that had never existed before. The human stood among them, guiding, observing, teaching, not as a ruler, not as a conqueror, but as a companion, a mentor, and an example of what humanity could achieve. Days passed, and the changes became more evident. Patrols were reorganized to rely on strategy rather than brute force. Defense systems were recalibrated to anticipate threats rather than simply destroy intruders. Soldiers trained in observation and communication, learning to work together, to think critically, and to protect without unnecessary aggression. The fortress, once a place of strict control and fear, became a center of learning, innovation, and cooperation. Xylar watched it all with a mixture of awe and satisfaction. The human's presence had transformed not only his people, but also himself. He felt lighter, freer, and more aware than he had in centuries. For the first time, he understood that strength was not only physical or technological, but moral, intellectual, and emotional. The human had demonstrated that survival was about more than winning battles. It was about inspiring others, guiding them, and creating a civilization capable of thriving without fear alone. One evening, as the red star dipped below the horizon and the jagged cliffs cast long, dramatic shadows, the human approached Xylar. "It is time for me to leave," they said softly. Xylar felt a pang of something he had not expected: loss. The human had become more than an intruder or a teacher. They had become a symbol, a living reminder of what was possible. "You will be remembered," he said. "Your teachings, your courage, they will shape my people for generations." The human smiled faintly. "That is all I could hope for. You have the strength to continue this path. Do not falter, Xylar. Lead with wisdom, and your civilization will thrive." They turned toward the ship that had brought them here, walking with the same calm confidence they had shown from the beginning. The soldiers watched in silence, their respect and admiration clear in their expressions. Xylar knew that the humans' departure would not erase their influence. They had planted seeds that would grow, and the world would be forever changed because of one human's courage, intelligence, and determination. As the ship lifted off, disappearing into the thin red light of the sky, Xylar stood on the cliff's edge. For centuries, he had defined strength through fear, power, and domination. Now he saw a new way, a path that combined courage, intelligence, and understanding. He had watched one human achieve what armies never could, and he knew that his civilization would be stronger for it. For the first time, Xylar smiled. Not a smile of triumph over an enemy, but of hope for the future. The human had come, challenged them all, and left a legacy that would endure far beyond their presence. The alien knew it was over, not because they had been defeated in battle, but because the human had achieved something far greater. They had changed the heart of a civilization. The fortress was quiet now, but the energy had shifted. Soldiers trained with new purpose, engineers devised new strategies, and young recruits looked to the future with hope instead of fear. Xylar walked among them, speaking, guiding, and observing, his mind open to the lessons he had learned. He had survived countless conflicts, faced innumerable foes, and endured centuries of warfare. Yet nothing had been as transformative as the presence of one human who had stepped inside their world, unafraid, unarmed, and unwavering in purpose. And in that quiet, jagged land under the fading light of the red star, Xylar understood fully. The human had not only survived, they had won, in a way that would shape history forever.